Good morning, everyone. This is Stephen, co-founder of Taraxa, and I'm here for our weekly AMA. So we are doing this little experiment by trying to introduce a interesting topic to every one of our AMAs. So we have been going through the backstory as well as some of the content of the book that Taraxa co-authored with Rieti, Japan's one of the Japan's ministerial divisions around blockchain. And so today we'll continue that topic. So it might be a little rough around the edges, this format, but we're gonna keep experimenting with it. And please give us your feedback on how you like this format and how we can make it a little bit better. The goal is to actually not only to talk about Taraxa, but also, occasionally introduce topics that are interesting in blockchain in general, so that we can all sort of participate on discussing the growth and development of the space together. Okay, so I think last time I talked about the origins of this book, and there were two chapters inside that where we actually helped to co-author, right? So chapter 2, I think I co-authored it with Yano-san, the president of Rieti, and then chapter 3 was a chapter that I wrote on my own. Today, let's talk a little bit about perhaps the beginning of the third chapter, chapter 3, and it's really around sort of what are some of the interesting challenges facing IoT and the IoT industry in general, and how blockchain can help to address it. All right. I want to, because this is somewhat of a book club, I thought it might be interesting to actually talk about, well, how did we come up with these ideas, or how did we, what sort of triggered these ideas, and what did we actually do about them later on? So instead of going through the book point by point, you can actually, obviously everyone can read the book. It's free, available as a digital download from Springer. We can send you guys the link again on our tweet. But really to figure out, hey, what are the backstories for some of this content, right? So okay. So the big idea, right, I think behind this chapter is really thinking about, well, how can we enable IoT devices or devices in general, right, to actually become a lot more autonomous? Today, I think in today's world, we have devices and machines that are very autonomous at making decisions about things, right? They're very good at analyzing the situation, like an autonomous vehicle. It's probably pretty smart about figuring out whether or not it's actually in a lane, or whether or not this object it's approaching is either a rock or a cat, whatever, right? So those type of decisions is very, very good, analytical decisions. But devices and machines in general, they're not really great at making economic decisions. In fact, I don't really think any devices today really make those kind of decisions, right? So for example, I am out of battery. How do I pay somebody to actually how do I pay somebody to actually recharge myself? Or my firmware, my software requires an upgrade. Who do I pay to get an upgrade? Should I pay? And how do I earn income, for example? Who should I sell my data to that I'm earning income? Who should I be performing tasks? All these decisions are made centrally, right, in central servers. So devices today really lack economic independence to make any of these decisions. There's obviously no marketplaces associated to help them to make these decisions either. So the idea is that blockchain is an interesting piece of technology that can really help to accelerate devices into into economic independence. And that comes with it a lot of very, very interesting properties and benefits, right? So I think in the section 1.1 of chapter 3 of this book, we actually talk about some of the challenges. I won't go through them point by point, but just going to highlight something that are highlight some of the very interesting ones that I think we actually we actually thought about. Okay, so cool. So the first one, the first section is about technical, right? So technical, there are lots of technical challenges with workload, with scalability. The one I really want to highlight is security, right? So the security question, I think, really captured a lot of people's imaginations, I think, especially when hackers created these viruses that actually overtook entire networks of IoT devices, like cameras you have at your home or whatnot, right? I think probably the most famous one, not necessarily the largest one, but the most famous one was called Mirai. Hackers, they use these botnets to actually conduct, interestingly, decentralized and uncoordinated and coordinated attacks against critical digital infrastructure. So, what is, what caused this problem, and how can blockchain possibly help? Well, early in the days of our project, we had, this is a shout out to one of our informal advisors early in our project, Mr. Mark Wright, who has been an industry veteran in IoT and IoT devices for decades here in Silicon Valley, introduced to us by our Stanford professor, Thomas Lee, who taught many of the classes that I took while I was at Stanford. And he's also actually my co-founder, Justin Snapp's thesis advisor. So what's really actually driving these security loopholes is really at the manufacturer side, right? So they, they're not really putting in the right security features. And the reason why they're not putting in the right security features is actually to create secure devices, especially secure software interfaces. You need both hardware, which is, it adds to the cost, as well as software, but also software infrastructure that are very difficult to maintain. You have to get these like root certificates from approved certificate issuers. They give you these hardware devices. One is locked in a basement in some vault somewhere. The other one you take back to your factory, to your company, and then you have to create a big digital infrastructure around it to help maintain, get it to issue keys, and God forbid if you lose it or it's broken, then you have to go back to the vault. Very complex and very costly, this entire process. So, okay, so if that's the problem, if that's really the one of the critical key causes of poor security, is that manufacturers find it very costly and very cumbersome to actually integrate good security. It's not that we don't have technology for good security, it's just that it's very cumbersome. We started thinking about, well, actually you can use decentralized networks to actually replace this very cumbersome infrastructure, right? So one of the solutions that we actually drafted was that you can actually create a decentralized system to actually generate these root certificates, and actually to store these root certificates and issue keys, right, directly into the production line, and also to recover these root keys if you lose them. So that was an interesting solution that I think we drafted to really address the solution of security for IoT devices by using decentralized systems, ironically, to lower the cost of actually integrating best security practices and technologies into the hardware IoT devices directly at the manufacturer side. Right. The second thing that's very interesting we talked about is sort of the business challenges, right? The business challenges that are currently facing IoT ecosystem. So one of the things that you actually run into if you're in the IoT business is that clients are always asking for a return on investment, right? So where's the business case? How am I making my money back, right? So these types of questions are very valid, obviously, because people spend lots of money and they expect a return. But the real problem here is that the true value of IoT is really data, right? It's the data they collect and what kind of value you can actually derive from that data. But currently, IoT systems are very, very siloed, right? I don't really think companies share their data willy-nilly. It's very, very difficult for any profit-seeking enterprise to go out and actually share their data. They see it as a competitive advantage, hurdle, or in general, even if they don't make money from it, they refuse to share it because they worry that competitors might learn some secrets from the data and destroy part of their competitive moat. So this is actually a very, very big problem, right? I think last few times, I think one of the audience members asked about data marketplaces, and there doesn't really exist this type of data marketplace for IoT data, and the vast majority of IoT devices are owned by companies, especially industrial companies, right? With tons of sensors on their manufacturing facilities and operational facilities, and so the problem with this is that there are really two examples here of where, data sharing can actually add a ton of value. And that's what's really been plaguing the space right now. So the first example was very interesting, was when we were actually, when I was actually creating my second startup. It was in IoT, it was in mobile health. And we actually met this interesting company. I mean, there are tons of these companies today, but back then I think it was still relatively innovative. We met this interesting company back in Boston, where they were creating these wristbands, right, that could detect heart rate at with a very high degree of accuracy. So this is over 10 years ago. Today it's not a big deal, but back then the technology was actually relatively cutting edge. And he was and this founder, right, he was trying to go around and trying to figure out, well, I have this innovative device. How can I gain traction with it? What can I use the data for? Well, it turns out that if you just get heart rate data, that's not very useful for doctors, right? He actually has a medical background. He wanted to get data to actually become useful for physicians, for diagnosis, for treatment, for whatever. Well, physicians, they require very high quality data, and the sensors back then, they didn't collect very high quality data, and also just having heart rate data was not very helpful to make any sort of meaningful diagnosis. You still had to go see a doctor, right? So he was trying very hard, right? So this data that he created specifically for medicine wasn't really picking up a lot of traction within medicine. But very interestingly, what he found out, and he didn't really implement the solution, but through a random conference that he attended, a policeman told him that, actually this data is very useful for us to detect, to get early detection of criminal activity, right? So what would they say? Well, what does that mean, right? How can you actually tell criminal activity from heart rate data? Well, if enough people are wearing these, right? If enough people are wearing these, then they can anonymously monitor these signals. So so if they're let's say, God forbid, there's a mass shooting somewhere in the mall, then very interestingly, the heart rate of all the people surrounding that area will suddenly spike up, right? And that was just one example that the policeman said that, hey, this is actually a really, really good way for us to get very early responses for police, for fire, for firefighters, for a lot of emergency response divisions, so that we can tell, when something's wrong in a specific area. So that's a very, very interesting example. The reason why I bring it up is because, this startup created this interesting product and collected data intending for it to be used in the industry that it started in, which is medicine. Except, it could have interesting uses for law enforcement, which he could never have thought about, at all, unless this data was out there available, to people who are in that world. So data is often useful, especially data collected by IoT devices, in the industry that you're not in, right? That you wouldn't even expect. Data is useful in very unexpected ways. And the fact that everything's siloed and locked away, it's actually very, very destructive, right, to unlocking the value of IoT. There was another example. It's very interesting. This is like around 4 years ago, not even 4. This is actually 5 years ago. I was talking to the head of a very, very large nuclear energy group that operated nuclear power plants. And what they told me was also very interesting. They said that, well, there are tons of sensors, obviously, on these, for example, these large turbines, right, that actually power, that actually generate the power, right? The nuclear reactors, they generate, the heat and the steam to power these large turbines. And these turbines are huge, huge, huge devices that are very sophisticated, that has tons of sensors on them. So they install all the sensors and they created all this infrastructure to analyze the data and try to make sure they are constantly optimizing and improving their operations. But what they said was that, actually what would be very interesting is if I had even anonymized data for the operational sensor data for any of the other nuclear power plants around the world, right? He said, I don't even need, analyzed data or model data or whatever. All I need is raw data, right? A sample of the raw data, 24-hour operations or weekly operations. And he said just having that raw data can really, really help us figure out how other people are running, are running their power plants, right? And the way they configure these devices, the way they run these devices, and I can infer a lot of things from security to operational efficiency just by looking at the raw sensor data. So, but too bad because nobody shares that data, right? So this is actually very frustrating. So this is another example of that, even without analytics, right? Just the raw data itself could hugely help to improve efficiency and security across the board within a specific industry if they shared the data, right? So this goes back, to summarize, one of the major challenges that face IoT today is lack of business cases, and that's primarily driven by the fact that data is not really shared and is siloed everywhere, right? The third category challenge that we point out in this section is really social challenges, and it has to really do with privacy, right? So privacy wasn't really that big a deal maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, because people didn't really have a lot of data. There weren't cameras everywhere, there weren't devices everywhere in our houses and just around the world recording every move that we made, right? So privacy really goes back to this idea of, well, who actually owns the data, right? Device manufacturers really, it started out being a very vague space. No one really thought about it. I think device manufacturers are sort of like the de facto owners. They have access to everything you have. And now they all operate on some sort of centralized system, but they still have access to all your data. So, blockchain is actually really good at actually granting access, right? Defining ownership and explicitly granting access to specific types of data, right? So the privacy encryption algorithms have been in existence for decades, right? The theory has been in existence probably for even much longer than that. We don't lack the technology. We lack a system to actually able to grant access, to actually preserve identity, to actually be able to enforce access and enforce ownership, right? So and that's actually really good. That's something that actually blockchain, a decentralized network like blockchain, is really good at doing. In the longer term, and this actually gels within with some of the focus that we're looking at, is that if you actually do want devices to become economically independent, they will have to actually establish not necessarily confirmed or revealed transparent identities, but really a system of reputations. They can remain anonymous if they wanted to, right? If devices are to trade data with people or with each other, others on the other side need to make sure that, hey, this data is actually real, they're reputable. I'm getting data from a real source, right? So that has to do with identity. The manufacturers, going back to our first question about security, have to enforce good security practices and actually install the hardware and software that's necessary to establish individualized identities for all of these devices. And also, there needs to be a track record, right, on-chain track record to allow activities to be recorded for data transactions, so that we know which devices or entities or whatever are actually trustworthy. So this allows much more of a decentralized trading. So, lots of interesting problems and challenges facing the IoT industry. And I think blockchain can actually help to greatly alleviate lots of them, right? So we talked about technical problems, we talked about business problems, and we talked about all of the social challenges, right? So, okay, so that was a very quick, I think, discussion around the third chapter, the first section of the third chapter of the book. And okay, let's check out some of the questions. I don't think we did a great job at announcing ahead of time exactly what content that we're going to be looking at. So we'll do a much better job going forward. Like I said, this is an ongoing experiment. So hopefully it's interesting and useful to your audience. Okay. All right, the first question. Mr. Steven, I don't think developers are good at writing. So who collaborated with you in this book about blockchain? Well, actually, I wrote and co-authored the sections that have to do with Taraxa and Taraxa's thinking around blockchain and technology around blockchain. I actually just wrote them on my own. So if maybe my writing's not that great, but no one else wrote it for me. We of course have editors, professional editors at the publisher side. For example, Springer, who published this book, they have professional editors. They didn't really change too much of my writing either, so I'm not sure if that's a that's an endorsement, or they just didn't didn't even bother. Yeah, so we the chapters in this book were written by me. So chapter 2 and chapter 3. Well, chapter 2 I co-author with Yano-san, so he and I both wrote it. Okay, so any plan for partnership with Fortune 9 companies like Deloitte? Wow, Fortune 9, so that's like a top 9 companies in the world. You probably mean Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 companies. We do have partners. We do have a partner that's actually huge, like that. Yeah, so we'll be making that announcement as soon as we clear it with the partner. So. Oh, also, by the way, I'm not sure if our community managers have mentioned this, but if you ask the question, please write in your email addresses for your question. I hope everyone hears this, or else we don't know how to give out rewards when we pick the best question. So if you want to participate in the drawing, please enter your email addresses so we can actually contact you. Preferably the email address is the same address that you use to register on our community site. So I'll mention this again at the end just so that everyone knows. So second question, any plan for partnership? Yeah, so we do have partnership with a very large enterprise, and we are trying to clear sort of a public announcement with it. Out of all the technical challenges, what are the biggest one in the IoT space now? How can Taraxa's application solve them? I think I actually answered that question. I think security is probably the most pressing right now in terms of technical challenges for the IoT space. And I mentioned a decentralized solution that could help to alleviate a lot of the cost and complexity on the manufacturer side, which are really the causes of these type of problems. Now, getting a whole bunch of factories around the world to adopt the system is tricky. It's definitely something to work towards. Yeah. What are the most exciting development avenues for blockchain IoT? Well, I think actually the most the most exciting avenue is really somehow to enable some sort of data trading, right? I know last time the time before last time, I'm not really sure, one of the audience members I think asked about the data marketplaces. The data marketplaces are very difficult to do because, like I said, because the veracity of the data and also piracy, right? So I think having veracity can be solved by a system of reputation. So like I said, I think that if we get the manufacturers to actually integrate these best security practices, we help establish unique identities, and bootstrap the ecosystem with trusted players in the beginning. It's like a trusted setup in cryptographic primitives, but then slowly we can actually start building up the ecosystem where I think data can be traded and the true value of IoT devices can actually be realized, right? It's going to be a long process though. When we list on big exchange like TerraCoin or Binance, I don't personally know. We're talking to these tier 1 exchanges. They haven't told us whether or not they want to list us yet. So we'll keep talking to them and we'll inform everyone we'll inform everyone once we do know. Yeah, I do want to remind everyone again that if you have not entered in your email address when you ask these questions, please enter your email address so that we can actually come and find you and pick the winners. My second question, why doesn't your security net have a dedicated code wallet? So I'm not sure why we need a dedicated cold wallet. There are lots of people out there making cold wallets. Why do we need to reinvent the wheel? Um, our IoT solution, our Helio solution, has a hardened hardware endpoint. That's sort of like a wallet, I think. That is essentially what a hardware wallet is, except our endpoint has even higher security because the MCU is right once. So in that sense, we have a secure endpoint, which we designed and manufactured to be deployed at our customers, inside their assets. So if that's what you mean, but those things are not very useful to individuals, right? They're actually useless to individuals, I think. So we don't have a cold wallet, but we have a hardened IoT endpoint. Yeah, so that's deploying our solution. You have to have that in order to interface with devices. If Chainlink does not support, which ecosystem will you continue to exist on? We don't exist on Chainlink. We're our own layer one ecosystem. So I'm not sure if that's a misunderstanding of how Chainlink and our Taraxa integration works. So Chainlink has a system of, Chainlink is the best Oracle provider in the world, the best decentralized Oracle provider in the world. And we are designing a co-developing a timestamp Oracle with them, which will be deployed on our network. So that's our integration. Taraxa doesn't exist in Chainlink, and Chainlink doesn't exist in Taraxa, right? It's not one or the other. It's a technical integration. When will the staking opportunity be granted on Gate.io stock market? Okay, so this goes back to the incentivized testnets, right? So we'll be releasing an incentivized node very, very, very soon. Internally, I think we are really trying to test these the software and the documentation, all of which are ready. So we're doing internal testing right now. So if everything goes well, you'll see it probably next week. The staking, I think, will be when will this happen? I'm not really sure when will happen on Gate, but we are definitely going to be talking to all of our exchange partners, Gate, BitMax, and KuCoin, to make sure that when we actually do implement the next phase, the mirror staking mechanism, that they work with us to stake everything over. Yeah. So exchange partners are obviously very important because that's where a ton of the the investors' coins are, right? So they're on exchanges. We don't have an exact timeline for that right now because we don't know how quickly exchanges work. We are keeping them updated on our progress though when it comes to staking, or at least the first phase of our mirror staking mechanism. So we'll give you updates as soon as we hear them. What is a light node? How does it help to accommodate IoT data flows? Please send the rewards. Okay, yeah. So somebody wrote in their email address. Okay, light nodes. So IoT devices don't really have a lot of power, computation power, or bandwidth, and a lot of them, they run on batteries too. So they don't even have a lot of energy to really expand on a full-blown full node. So a light node, the definition of a light node for within conventional blockchain like Bitcoin or Ethereum is that it's a node that doesn't really participate in consensus, but is actually able to interact by submitting transactions into the system and be able to verify statements that it hears about from the network. Right, even when it doesn't have a copy of the full state, right? So that's where the Merkle tree actually comes in. A very, very useful tool. Yeah. So IoT, low energy, low power, low bandwidth. It needs a node that are not in sort of full consensus communication with the rest of the network, because it doesn't have the resources necessary to actually do that. But at the same time, it also needs some way so that the node itself cannot be tricked, right, by whatever other nodes it's communicating with. So that's where things like the Merkle proofs actually come in. All right. So okay. So I guess those are all the questions, and oh, we're exactly on time, 8:29. Thank you everyone who asked questions, and yeah, if you I see there some people have left already probably, but you know, please remember to to writing your email address along with your questions so that we can actually give you the rewards to the right person. Okay. All right. Thank you everyone. I'll see you all next week.